story out.
Right. All right, John Podesta, thanks for joining me.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
I'm joined now by Nick Ackerman, former Assistant Special Watergate Prosecutor, and Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and an MSNBC contributor. Nick, let me start with you as a former Watergate investigator. Hearing this new information, and particularly hearing the information in the context of them, Donald Jr., not telling the truth, what are your investigative impulses and instincts? What would you want to know? What would you want to be looking
I would go absolutely crazy here. I mean, I'd want to know everything. I mean, it's not just in the context of his lies and his changes of stories, but it's in the context of everything else that's happening. Look what happened to Paul Manafort 3 weeks prior to that meeting was appointed the chairman of Donald Trump's campaign.
Which was itself a somewhat surprising move at the time.
But look who brought him to the dance. Roger Stone.
Right.
This is the same Roger Stone who a couple months later admitted that prior to that time, he was having conversations with both ends of the group that was hacking Mr. Podesta's email. He was talking...
An individual named Guccifer, who many believe, I think...
Was a Russian.
Consensus is a Russian, Russian intelligence agent.
And Julian Assange. And he was able to predict when things were going to happen. So what we have here is a real web of collusion that has to be followed up. Emails have to be subpoenaed. People have to look at computers. You've got to look at IP addresses. You've got to determine where things went, when they came in. There are a lot. This is going to be a very boring investigation, but you need lots and lots of documents.
So Naveed, here's my here's what you and I have talked for a while, and you had specific experience working with Russian counterintelligence and trying to sort of suss out someone that was trying to recruit you, and you yourself were a sort of double agent, and you've been skeptical of this idea of collusion because it just seems unlikely to you from what you know about how Russian intelligence is operated to sort of lay your cards on the table and say, hey, let's work together. What is the new information we're getting doing to that belief of yours?
I think what we're seeing, Chris, is actually the pattern emerging of what Russian intelligence was trying to do. When you look at Peter Smith, when you look, as Nick just mentioned, Guccifer, and now what we're seeing with Don Jr., I think what this was a sophisticated human intelligence operation using dangles. So with Peter Smith, the Russians dangled out the hope of the 33,000 emails, missing emails. With Don Jr., they dangled out the potential of damaging information on Hillary Clinton. And perhaps with Guccifer and Roger Stone, they dangled out the hopes of coordinating with WikiLeaks. Now, when you do that, Chris, what you are attempting to do, human is also, gaining intelligence from human sources, but it's also the targeting and the recruiting of individuals with the eventual goal of directing them. My concern here is that this was a clear attempt by the Russians to essentially try and recruit U.S. persons. Perhaps collusion would have been down the road. I'm still skeptical about that, but it seems very clearly that they were trying to gain access with the attempt, and this is why this woman sat down with Donald Jr. and at the end of the day had nothing to offer in terms of Hillary. It was a clear, card move there with a dangle, just meant to get a meeting.
Are you confident that we have three stories. I didn't meet with anyone. We met and we talked about adoption. Now it's clearly, I went into it thinking that I could maybe get some dirt on Hillary Clinton. And there's some possible legal exposure there because it's illegal to solicit or accept foreign campaign contributions. Right. Anything of value, not just money. Are you of the belief that we now know the actual story about what happened in that meeting?
Oh, absolutely not. Not even close. I mean, you've got three liars who are involved in this thing. Three people who don't even know what the truth is. You've got Jared Kushner, who remarkably had amnesia when it came time to fill out his security clearance
Time again, under penalty of perjury, has omitted key meetings with Russian
Exactly.
officials.
So, I mean, we're not going to get the truth from these three people. I can guarantee that. What we're going to need is just good old-fashioned gumshoe investigation going after emails and computers and trying to put this together.
Okay, to Naveed, to your point, this is important, just for context, right? So you mentioned Peter Smith, who is a wealthy, a Republican, Trump-backing financier, guy who raised money for Republicans, who had sort of started his own operation to try to acquire what he thought were Hillary Clinton's deleted 33,000 emails. Now, interesting note, the first tweet that Donald Trump sends about that, this is a tweet, where are your 33,000 emails that you deleted? That is on June 9th. That's on the day of the meeting. This is the same 33,000 emails he looks into a camera, tells Russia to hack. It does seem that at some point, someone placed the idea in Donald Trump's head and in Peter Smith's head and maybe other people in the orbit that perhaps it was the Russians had those emails.
I think that's absolutely right, and that is clearly, look, human intelligence at its core is manipulation, Chris, and I think what you're seeing is actually how the Russians, frankly, manipulated Donald Trump. And I think, this idea that, Putin was going to call up Donald Trump directly and say, do you want us to help you throw the election in your favor? That didn't happen. It's a sophisticated network of cutouts to communicate indirectly with Trump, and I think what you're seeing is the actual apparatus that was used to do that. It is, and look, at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about here, Nick just mentioned the security forms. What I'm concerned about with lying and covering this up is that to me is an indication of someone who potentially was recruited by the Russians and is attempting to cover their tracks. That is a clear indicator in the counterintelligence world when you lie about those, even if it's not a crime to meet with these people. When you try to cover that up, that is a pretty serious indicator that you are attempting to, to hide a relationship.
Nick, of course, the sort of famous phrase of Watergate, what did the president know, when did he know it, right? So the whole thing ended up being what was Nixon read into the whole thing, and of course it was, as revealed in the tapes.
Of course.
Quite personally, calling Chuck Colson, whatever. The president's lawyer, one of them says, the president didn't know about this meeting. Do you find it credible that
Absolutely,
he did not know?
not even close. I mean, first of all, they had lunch together that day. Paul Manafort and Trump had lunch that day.
Trump was in the tower, in Trump Tower all day.
He was there all day. The
His
place was...
son, his campaign manager, and his son-in-law all go
Exactly.
to a meeting.
And no one talks about it. They don't know what's going on. Look, it's the same thing that Jeff Sessions did. Jeff, I don't recall Sessions, over 21 times. Did you have lunch with Godzilla that day? Oh, I don't remember. Did you go to the park? I don't remember. He doesn't remember anything, nor does Trump. And Trump is going to take the I don't recall defense straight on.
All right, Nick Ackerman, Naveed Jamali, thank you both.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Coming up, how Donald Trump Jr. ended up in a meeting during the 2016 presidential election with a Russian lawyer.